We talk about moats in business where you're trying to create a way that competitors can't get in. And there's lots of ways to do that. But I actually think buyer alignment and having really deep resonance with your target audience, and understanding them, building
Welcome
product to
to
them,
the
that can be a
Buyer-Centric
moat
OS,
that a lot of competitors
a system
cannot
for
cross.
revolutionary customer experience. With your hosts, Andy Halko and Tony Zayas. This show helps you turn guesswork into growth by putting your buyer at the center of everything.
Hey everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Buyer-Centric Operating System. Today we're going to be focusing on what is chapter 13 in the book, The Competitive Advantage of Buyer Centricity. Andy, last week we unpacked vitals and looked at OKRs and things like that. We're essentially at this point shifting gears into it's part 4 of the book. It feels like this is where it all kind of things come together. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, we're really moving now into true rubber hits the road, where we're now looking at how do we truly execute some of these pieces. And we start off this part of the book really just redefining why being buyer-centric is a competitive advantage. And that, if you follow this approach, it really does allow you to outpace and outcompete other people in your market.
Right. And there's a point here that you open the chapter saying that growth doesn't belong to the fastest, it belongs to the most aligned. I love that quote. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in today's market, everybody's trying to move fast. And I think of the posters that startups put up is, ship it now, or whatever that poster is that I see all the time. And speed is one of those things. We always feel like we're behind and we're trying to keep up. But the one thing about speed is that if you're moving fast, but you're moving in the wrong direction, you are never going to get where you want to be. And so we have to make sure that we're aligned. And I've actually talked about this for many, many years of getting teams aligned to the same point on the horizon, because the last thing that you want as a company is everybody moving in different directions, let alone moving in the wrong direction. And so it's really important to get alignment towards your buyer, because that is the point on the horizon that I think is most successful. And then get your team aligned together at that same point. And that's where you see success. And you can then accelerate and add speed. But those companies that are just moving quickly, but they're not aligned to that buyer, and the team's not aligned to the buyer, they are going to end up in a place that is not going to be successful.
So when you talk about that alignment with the buyer, I think of, I've heard of the concept of like commander's intent in like the military, where concept is it's passed down. It's like the instructions at like minimal viable instructions, essentially, of what the goal is of some type of operation. And so the different teams can say, okay, we're going to get here by doing this and that. It's not micromanagement. It's not this little minute, really detailed, but it's ultimately, this is our objective. And then basically the units kind of figure it out from there, but they align. And so when I hear that, I feel like, is that the point on the horizon, is like to really operate? So for my department, my team, we're operating in a way that is really in alignment with the buyer, their needs, understanding them. Might not be there today, but here's how we get there. Is that point of alignment, like down the road?
Well, I think we spent a lot of time last episode on the North Star metric.
Right.
And that was really about how do you create a single metric in the business that represents that your buyer, your customer has achieved value, and that you have achieved value and revenue. And both of those things happen. And so I think that North Star does become the true point on the horizon. It
Right.
doesn't mean that you don't need guide rails, and that's what a lot of the rest of the system is about, is helping people, stay in that lane and helping them find the path. But that North Star is that point on the horizon to get everybody aligned to, because it does define the true value of a buyer getting value, and then the company getting value.
Right. So the magic in the North Star is really that represents that kind of success metric with being aligned buyer centricity that's delivering value for the buyer. Awesome. That's a really good reminder of like keeping that on the horizon as the goal. And then there are these four levers of buyer-centric market power. Did you want to touch on those? We have faster learning loops, deeper trust, higher retention. Third one is resonance over reach, and then adaptation as acceleration.
Yeah, it's really one of those things. Again, we're talking about how, companies can be more competitive. Being buyer aligned is such a powerful piece of that. I think these four levers really just talk about how it helps you become competitive. That, when we're buyer aligned and we're following a system, we can develop these loops that help us learn what the buyers need or what their pains are, implement, go back and learn again. It's really about doing that really well. Deeper trust, higher retention. That's a lot about a lever really creating, resonance with those buyers, creating connection, delivering that value, that North Star, and that increases retention, which for any business is really impactful. Resonance over reach, just the lever of making sure that you're not just communicating, but you're actually connecting. And then that adaptation as acceleration is really the idea that, we have to be agile as companies, especially agile around changing buyers, because their needs change, the market changes, and we've really got to adapt to that. And all of that comes back to what this chapter in the book and this part of the book is, which is how do we become a buyer-centric company instead of a solution-centric company, company-centric business, and even a competitor-centric business.
Right.
Those are different viewpoints, and you really want to make sure that you're moving the business towards that buyer-centric mindset.
Right. And when you talk a bit about the competitor-centric companies, that, in the book, it talks a little bit, touches on the idea of that's chasing, not leading. How do you know that you've fallen into that trap? Because we all have to pay attention to some extent to competitors, but how do you not fall into the trap of chasing?
Well, I think over the years that I've worked with different clients, is there are definitely those flavors of companies that are always paying attention to their competitors. They're kind of over analyzing it. You definitely want to understand your market. You want to analyze your competitors. But what you don't want to do is say they just released this feature. Dev team, we're dropping all of our priorities and we're going to mirror that feature because our competitor just launched it. That is, and I've literally seen that process happen, that they see a competitor do an announcement about a new feature and all of the sudden the entire dev process gets shaken up. And I'm sure other people have seen that as well. That's chasing.
Right.
And it's not buyer aligned, because I think we've even mentioned in a past show, just because a competitor launches something doesn't mean they went through the process to understand this is valuable for the end customer. We don't know that. We don't know what their internal process is. So we don't want to chase competitors. We want to chase our buyers and delivering them value, because that's what's going to drive revenue.
So we need to have that peripheral awareness of what the competition's doing, but it shouldn't cause us to be reactive to what they're doing and kind of saying, well, now we have to shift. So that makes a lot of sense. What about you also mentioned solution-centric companies. what are the pitfalls there that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think those are the businesses that are kind of the opposite of the competitor centric, but they're more focused on their ideas and the product. And it's really more about like that innovative entrepreneur that's got a new idea every week. And I might be that a little bit here and there. I totally understand that position, but new ideas. And instead of testing with the buyers, they move quickly into it from a product perspective. If it's marketing in a solution-centric company, they're talking about the new feature and they're talking about their innovation instead of saying, you know, this is the outcome and the value that you're going to get as the customer for this. And so in the marketing, you see a lot of stuff that's more solution-centric. It's like, here's our cool new feature. You know, this is what this does instead of this is what outcome you get. And so you can definitely see a solution-centric company that's just a little bit obsessed about themselves. And that's very similar to the company-centric model. Company-centric's just a slightly different flavor of, you know, they're more about their culture. They're more about their awards. They're more about, you know, all these things that of who they are as people. Not that that's not important, but they prioritize that over their customer, over their buyer. And those are those three, the solution-centric, the company-centric, and the competitor-centric, or some mix of those three that can be really detrimental if you're not prioritizing the buyer-centric mindset.
Yeah, and I would say I've when you mention those examples, I can think of companies that like totally fall into the different categories. Some, you know, have crossover and a few. I think sometimes it's a level of comfort. Some of those things come easier. So the people that are hyper aware of competitors, it's just that impulse to be reactive and respond because we got to match with them. The people that are full of ideas, that are always coming up with solutions, that comes easy to them. So typically, you know, that's a way that it feels like pressing forward. Is coming up with new solutions and ideas and doubling down on that. So,
yeah, and a psychological aspect that I don't have in my book that I've thought of before is, you know, take it back to normal human relationships. That, I mean, I think today we have an easier time talking about ourselves or, you know, presenting what we're doing to the world, especially now in this world of social media. But we're not complimenting other people. We're not listening to them as well. We're not, you know, speaking to what their interests are. Right. I think that, you know, as a group of people, we have a tendency to see the world from our perspective. And so I think not only do you take that in a business, that same approach is that you see it from your world out. And that's why earlier in the book, I think one of the very first chapters is, you know, instead of inside out, you need to be an outside in company. But it's really easy, and it's our default nature to be inside out because that's just how we're viewing the world.
It's more challenging to really dig and understand the client, the buyer, the audience.
And relate to them and, you know, have those conversations and start with them. I mean, it's really all about shifting that perspective to they're first, they're the priority, they're what we're focused on. That's hard to do. It really can be.
So for the company that deeply understands their buyer, you mentioned that they build a moat that can't be crossed with code. Can you unpack that statement? I think that's really profound.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about moats in business where you're trying to create a way that competitors can't get in. And there's lots of ways to do that. But I actually think buyer alignment and having really deep resonance with your target audience and understanding them, building product to them, that can be a moat that a lot of competitors cannot cross. Because one, they can't shift to that same mindset. And two, once you build that connection, once you build that rapport and all of these things, it really embeds you into that target audience in such a strong way. And so I really think, people a lot of times look for technological moats, what's a technology or what's data that our competitors can't get. I think focusing on a moat that is built on buyer trust, buyer alignment, buyer rapport, that is something that can really be defensible against anyone coming into the marketplace.
Right. Yeah, that is definitely something you can't just copy. It's got to be authentic. So great point. Just to kind of wrap up for today. So if a CEO's tuning in and they want to make buyer centricity that competitive advantage, what's the first lever that you would recommend kind of as for most folks that are out there that you'd pull from this chapter?
Well, I think, related to this chapter, but just kind of, I'll look at it from the global point of this book and concept. I think it's back to our twins, which we, talked about in a few chapters, but the idea of, personas are the old model, twins are the new model. And really what that boils down to is understanding your customer better than anybody else. You can't be buyer-centric. You cannot implement any of these systems. You can't measure vitals if you don't understand that audience really well. And so I think if you are a CEO coming in and saying you want to be buyer-centric, the first place that you start is say, let's not do customer intelligence, buyer intelligence as a vanity exercise, as something to say, let's go out and figure this out. Let's actually dig in and really understand it, really collect the right data, really build a system to simulate and model customers, because that is going to be, what helps set up the rest of these activities.
Right. No, that's fantastic. Really good stuff. We're going to kind of wrap up this series next week. So I think it'll be a good one for everyone to tune in to. Make sure you come back for that. But if you have not checked out the book, it is available on Amazon, the Buyer-Centric Operating System. And we will have our last session on this book and diving into it and help you guys work through it next week. So tune in. Thank you for joining this time, and we will see you guys next time. Take care.
Thanks for tuning into the Buyer-Centric OS. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and grab your copy of the Buyer-Centric Operating System by Andy Halko, available now on Amazon. For more tools and insights, visit andyhalko.com.